Chioma, is everything alright at home? You seem a million miles away today, Nneka asked softly. Chioma offered a faint smile and shrugged. I'm okay, maybe just a little tired, she replied, not meeting her friend's eyes. She wasn't one to easily share her worries. In her heart, she hoped it was just a rough patch that would soon pass. So you decided to make me a widow, to fake your death and disappear. That was your solution, leaving me to believe you burned alive, to cry over an empty coffin. At this, Amara let out a strangled cry herself. Fake your death, Kunle? What is she talking about? Chioma Nwosu's white lace wedding gown shimmered in the golden afternoon light streaming through the church windows. She stood at the altar of a packed Lagos church, her hand trembling in Oluwaseun Adeyemi's gentle grasp. It was the happiest day of her life. As the officiating pastor declared them husband and wife, tears of joy welled up in Chioma's eyes. Seun smiled at her with such warmth and devotion that her heart swelled. In that moment, surrounded by music and jubilant ululations from their families, Chioma felt certain that their love would last forever. After the ceremony, they emerged into the humid Lagos evening, greeted by cheers. Chioma's Igbo relatives from Enugu danced alongside Sheu's Yoruba family from Ibadan, blending traditions in a vibrant display of unity. Sheu twirled Chioma around in her flowing gown, making her laugh in delight as their friends clapped and took pictures. Under the twinkling lights at the reception later that night, Sheu gave a heartfelt toast, promising to always protect her and make her happy. Chioma dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, overwhelmed by emotion. She had never felt so loved and certain of anything as she did about Sheu at that moment. In the early days of their marriage, that promise felt unbreakable. They settled into a cozy home in Surulere, where every corner held the warmth of their hopes and dreams. Chioma, a dedicated school teacher, would come home in the afternoons with funny stories about her primary school students. Sheu would listen with a wide grin as he loosened his tie after a long day running his small logistic company. He often brought her suya, spicy grilled meat, from a roadside vendor on his way back from work, teasing that he only married her for her love of tasty street food. In turn, she would cook his favorite egusi soup on Sundays, laughing when he insisted her Igbo-style recipe was almost as good as his mother's Yoruba version. Their love was tender and playful. Late at night, they would lie in bed whispering about their future, children they hoped to have someday, the house they wanted to build in a quieter neighborhood away from the city's bustle. On rainy evenings, when thunder rattled their windows, Chioma would coil into Sheu's arms and feel utterly safe. He would stroke her hair and call her Nkem, my own, assuring her that he would always be by her side. If she woke from a bad dream, he would light a candle and pray with her until she felt peace again. Sometimes, Chioma marveled at how lucky she was. In her mid-20s, she had found a good man who treated her with respect and kindness. Many of her friends were still searching for love or stuck in an unhappy relationships. But she and Sheu were best friends as much as husband and wife. She remembered one Saturday when she had fallen ill with a high fever. Sheu cancelled his business meetings to stay home and tend to her. He placed a cool cloth on her forehead and made a peppery chicken stew, just like her late mother used to do, gently coercing her to eat a few spoonfuls. "Anything for my chi," he would say with a playful grin, pressing a tender kiss to her forehead. Moments like that made her chest bloom with gratitude and love for him. Yet, as months turned into a couple of years, subtle shadows crept into their bright world. It began with the way Seun's warm laughter grew less frequent. His logistic business faced mounting challenges, port delays that stranded shipments, the rising cost of diesel fuel, clients who paid their invoices late or not at all. In the evenings, Chama noticed Seun massaging his temples more often, his face drawn in worry as the nightly news droned on the TV. She would ask if he was okay, and each time he flashed a quick reassuring smile. "I'm fine, my love," he insisted. "Just a long day, nothing to worry about." She wanted to believe him. She would rub his shoulders, feeling the tension coiled in his muscles, and urge him to get some rest. He might relax for a short while, but the worries always seemed to return. He tried to downplay it with a weak joke about angry customers and delivery vans perpetually stuck in Lagos traffic. Chioma didn't laugh. She sat beside him on the couch, laying a hand on his knees. "We're in this together," she whispered, searching his eyes in the semi-darkness. "If something is wrong, we can fix it." For a moment, Chewu's lips parted, as if he were about to spill the heavy secret weighing on his shoulder. His eyes glistened with emotion and worry, raw and unguarded. But just as quickly, he looked away and swallowed hard. He cupped her cheek and forced a small smile. "It's fine, really, it's fine. Go back to sleep," he murmured, kissing her forehead with distracted lips. "I promise, I'll sort everything out." Reluctantly, Chama returned to bed, but she couldn't shake the sense that her husband was drifting to a place where she could not reach him. Unknown to her, Seun's problems ran far deeper than a few delayed shipments. In a bid to grow Adeyemi Logistics, he had taken out hefty loans from both the bank and some private lenders during a boom time when business was good. But a major contract fell through without warning, and a downturn in the economy choked many of his clients. He found himself scrambling to stay afloat as bills piled high. Debt mounted like storm clouds on the horizon, dark and menacing. Each week brought new phone calls that he quickly silenced and letters he left unopened on his desk. There were tense meetings with stern-faced creditors he never mentioned to his wife. Pride gnawed at him. He was determined to solve it alone and shield Choma from his failures. The shame of admitting how badly he had mismanaged things was more than he could bear. Later at night, when Choma was fast asleep, a single tear would sometimes slip from Seun's eyes as he lay on his back, staring at the ceiling. In those lonely hours, he felt the walls of his life closing in, squeezing out the air. He began avoiding their cheerful nightly chats and became more withdrawn. Choma sensed that he was hiding something, but whenever she pressed gently, he deflected her concern with a peck on her cheek or a weary sigh. At school, she found herself increasingly distracted, her mind wandering from lesson plans to her husband's welfare. She would worry if Seun had managed to eat lunch or whether he was safe driving on the chaotic expressways with his deliveries. One breezy afternoon, as she graded homework under the shade of a mango tree in the schoolyard, her friend and fellow teacher Nneka noticed the faraway look in her eyes. "Chioma, is everything alright at home? You seem a million miles away today," Nneka asked softly. Chioma offered a faint smile and shrugged. "I'm okay, maybe just a little tired," she replied, not meeting her friend's eyes. She wasn't one to easily share her worries. In her heart, she hoped it was just a rough patch that would soon pass, that her loving husband would return to his old cheerful self once the stress eased. But the strain in their home only grew. One evening, Cheung came home unusually late, well past dinner time. By the time the clock neared midnight, Chama was frantic. She had tried calling him repeatedly, but each call went unanswered. Feeding her dread, she paced the length of their small living room, imagining terrible possibilities with every passing minute. When the front door finally creaked open, she rushed over, her heart pounding. Cheung stood in the doorway, looking exhausted and disheveled. His normally crisp shirt was wrinkled and untucked, and his eyes were bloodshot. Relief flooded through Chama that he was alive and safe, but it quickly mingled with hurt and anger. Cheung, what happened? I've been so worried, she exclaimed, her voice trembling. It's almost midnight. I called and called. Why didn't you answer? Tears of stress were bright in her eyes. He looked at her, guilt and fatigue etched on his face, as if struggling to find an explanation. I'm sorry, he finally mumbled. The meeting ran long. Without another word, he shuffled past her and collapsed onto the couch, avoiding her gaze. The sharp scent of alcohol wafted from his clothes, an unfamiliar smell on him. Chama's heart sank. This was so unlike the man she knew. She knelt down beside him and took his hand, alarmed to feel it cold and clammy despite the warm night. Her own hands trembled. Talk to me, please, she pleaded softly, searching his face. Her mind swelled with fear. Had there been an accident? Was someone threatening him? Still, Cheung refused to explain further. He squeezed her hand weakly and shook his head. I'm handling it. I'll be fine. It's under control. He muted, the words lowering slightly from fatigue or drink. His haunted eyes were rimmed red, and he did not offer anything more. That night, they slept back to back for the first time since their wedding. Cheung passed into a restless stupor almost immediately. Beside him, Chama lay awake for hours, silent tears soaking her pillow. The gulf between them felt as wide and dark as the ocean, and she didn't know how to bridge it. In desperation, she pressed her palms together and prayed in the darkness, whispering, God, whatever this is, please help us through it, please. In her wildest nightmares, she never could have imagined what her husband was contemplating, nor the storm that was about to sweep through their lives and tear her world apart. It happened on a cloudy afternoon about 2 weeks after that tense night. Cheung had grown increasingly skittish and distant. He would flinch when his phone rang and step outside to take hushed calls. Chama often caught him staring off into space with an expression that chilled her, a mix of despair and grim resolve. She felt him slipping away, but every time she tried to pull him back with love, he only smiled weakly and assured her everything would be alright soon. On that fateful day, Cheung claimed he had to drive to Benin City for an urgent meeting with a potential client. He kissed Chama goodbye in the morning, holding her a little too tightly, as if memorizing the feel of her. I'll be back by tomorrow, I promise, he said softly, his eyes lingering on her face. She brushed a hand over his cheek, noticing it was damp with perspiration even in the cool morning air. Something in his voice, in that embrace, made her heart flutter with unspoken worry. Still, she forced a smile and straightened his collar. Drive safely, okay? I love you, she whispered. He pressed his forehead to hers for a fleeting moment. I love you too, always, came his reply, heavy with emotion. Then he turned and walked to his car, giving her one last wave before driving off. Chama stood in the doorway watching until his blue sedan disappeared into the rush of Lagos traffic. Hours later, as dusk settled, Choma was at home, marking her student exercise books, when her phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. She almost let it ring through, expecting a spam call. But something in her gut urged her to answer. The voice on the other end introduced himself as a police officer. Choma's stomach tightened, and her heart kicked against her ribs. Her mind immediately jumped to Seun. The officer's tone was somber yet gentle, but nothing could soften the horror of his words. There had been a major accident on the expressway that afternoon. A tanker truck's brakes had failed, causing a multi-vehicle collision and a terrible fire. One of the cars involved, a blue sedan, was engulfed in flames. The license plate had been traced back to Seun Adeyemi. Chioma's vision blurred. No, there must be a mistake, she whispered, voice thin as paper. She realized she had risen to her feet, the notebook spilling from the lap onto the floor. The officer continued carefully. The fire had been severe. They found remains in the driver's seat of the sedan, but the victim was burned beyond recognition. He paused as Chama let out a strangled whimper. They were working to identify the body, he said softly, but based on the car's registration and personal item recovered from the scene, her husband's briefcase, some documents with his name, they were certain it was Seun. No, Chioma gasped. Her knees buckled as the room began to spin. She sank to the floor, the phone slipping from her hand faintly. She heard the officer's distant voice cracking through the receiver. Madam, are you there? But Chioma could not respond. A keening wail rose from the depth of her soul, a raw animal sound of pain that she could not control. It burst out of her, filling the small living room with anguish. The next hours passed in a foggy haze of disbelief. Word spread quickly, and soon Nneka rushed over to the apartment as soon as she heard the news. She found Chioma collapsed on the rug, clutching one of Seun's shirts from the laundry basket. Chioma had pulled it out in her confusion, and now she pressed it to her face, soaking the fabric with her tears. Gently, Nneka knelt and wrapped her arms around her friend, rocking her back and forth as Chioma sobbed uncontrollably. It can't be true. It can't be true, Chioma choked out over and over, shaking her head in denial. Nneka's own eyes brimmed with tears, but she kept murmuring softly, I'm here, Chioma. I'm here. I've got you. By the following day, the grim reality became inescapable. Tunde, Seun's close friend, went with police officers to the accident site to assist however he could. He recognized what was left of Seun's car, though the blue sedan was now nothing but a charred, twisted shell. Among the wreckage, they recovered a few personal items that had somehow survived the blaze. A wristwatch Chama had given Seun on their first anniversary, its face cracked and blackened by heat, and a gold wedding band, charred but still unmistakably the same ring that had never left Seun's finger. When Tunde brought these items to Choma later that day and placed them gently into her trembling hands, the last fragile hope she had been holding onto shattered. There was no denying it now. These were Seun's belongings. He was gone. A howl of grief tore from deep in Choma's chest as she clutched the burned wedding ring to her heart. She doubled over, rocking back and forth on the floor as fresh agony consumed her. It felt as though someone had reached into her body and ripped out a part of her soul. Everything around her blurred into a well of tears and pain. The days that followed were a surreal nightmare. Choma moved on as if in a trance, barely eating, barely speaking. People came and went from the apartment. Family members, church folks, neighbors and co-workers, all murmuring condolences that floated over her like distant echoes. She could hardly register the words. Be strong. Some said, God knows the best. Others offered. At one point, she dimly heard someone whisper, God gives and God takes. And a flash of anger tore through her grief. She wanted to scream at them, to ask how they could say such a thing when half of her heart had been cruelly taken away. One evening, about a week after the accident, Chama found herself sitting on the kitchen floor amid shards of broken glass. She had dropped a drinking glass and hadn't even realized it until she saw the blood from a cut on her hand. She didn't feel the pain. In the next room, she could hear Mama Adeyemi, Seun's mother, wailing in sorrow with relatives trying to console her. He had been her only son. Chama felt like a ghost drifting through the ruins of her own life, barely present, numb and shattered. They held a funeral service the following week, even though there was no intact body to bury. A polished coffin was draped in white cloth at the front of the church, filled with what remains could be recovered and some of Seun's cherished personal items. The church was overflowing with murmurs. Seun had been well liked, and news of the tragedy had spread far and wide. Chama sat in front of the church, supported by her father on one side and Nneka on the other. She was dressed in a somber black mourning attire, her head wrapped in a black scarf according to custom. Her face looked hollow, and her eyes were swollen and dry. She had no tears left to shed by then. As the choir softly sang a slow Igbo dirge of farewell, Chama stared at the coffin in numb disbelief. It felt impossible that this service, this final goodbye, was for her Seun, the lively man who just weeks ago had been laughing with her and holding her close at night. When it came time for tribute, Chama could barely stand, with Nneka holding her arm for support. She made her way to the lectern with a framed photo of Seun clutched to her chest. In the picture, he was smiling wide and handsome, full of life. Her hand shook so badly that the glass in the frame rattled against the podium. She tried to speak, but her throat tightened. My husband, she managed to whisper, her voice cracking. The microphone caught a faint sob and a rustle as she steadied herself. He was a good man, she continued haltingly. He made me so happy. A fresh wave of grief hit her, and her vision swam with tears. I don't know how to live without him, she ended in a broken whisper. Chama's knees buckled as a sob racked her body, and two relatives quickly stepped forward to hold her upright. She covered her face, overcome. Around the church, many were openly weeping with her. In that moment, it felt as if the entire congregation shared the weight of her sorrow, unified in heartbreak and compassion. After the funeral, Chama existed in a state of half-life. Days and nights blurred together, each one devoid of meaning. Every morning she would wake in the grey pre-dawn, and for a blissful ignorant second, she would think everything was normal, perhaps even reaching across the bed to feel for Seun. Then the memory of his death would crash down on her anew with merciless force, and the pain would settle heavily in her chest for the rest of the day. His clothes still hung in their closet, exactly where he left them. She couldn't bear to pack them away or give them up. Doing so felt like erasing him. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, she would sit on the floor of that closet, surrounded by his shirt and jacket, inhaling the lingering scent of his cologne until her tears soaked the fabric. In those moments, the ache of loss was so deep that she felt it in her bones. Concerned for her well-being, Nneka and a few family members took turns staying with Choma during those first weeks, gently supporting her through the worst of the storm. They coerced her to take a few bites of food or sip water when she forgot to eat. They made sure she bathed and got out of bed at least once a day. Still, many nights, when the apartment was quiet and the weight of the emptiness pressed on her, Chama would wander into the living room. She often curled up on the sofa, clutching the framed wedding photo of her and Sheung. In that photo, they were cutting their cake on their wedding day, both of them laughing with frosting smeared on their noses. A joyful, silly moment frozen in time. Now she would trace a trembling finger over Sheung's face under the glass and whisper, "Why, Sheung? Why did you leave me?" Sleep was her only escape, and even that offered a little relief. When exhaustion finally dragged her into slumber, her dreams were filled with him. Sometimes she dreamed of their happiest days, walking hand in hand on Bar Beach at sunset, or dancing in their living room. Other times, she relived the nightmare, flashes of fire and screeching metal, waking up with her heart hammering and her cheeks wet with tears. More than once, Choma bolted upright in the darkness, sure she had just heard the jingle of his keys in the front door, or his familiar voice softly calling her name from the hallway. But each time, she was met only with silence and the dim outline of the furniture. Cheon was not there, and the realization caught her anew. As weeks turned into months, the initial flood of visitors and well-wishers gradually thinned. People had to return to their own lives. The world moved on, even if Choma felt frozen in place. Friends and relatives still checked on her, but with less frequency. Some gently encouraged her to start finding her way back to normalcy, however impossible that seemed. The headmistress of Choma's school called her one afternoon to express her condolence again and to let her know that whenever she felt ready to return, the school was waiting for her. The children have been asking of her. Auntie Chioma, the headmistress added kindly. Around the same time, Nneka, who worked at the same school, began to visit daily, urging Chioma to take walks outside to get a bit of sun and fresh air. Nneka even offered to accompany her on her first day back, arm in arm, so she wouldn't have to face the staff and students alone. At first, the thought of standing in a classroom again, pretending to be okay, seemed unbearable. How could she smile and teach songs about the alphabet when her heart was in pieces? How could the world expect her to carry on as though everything hadn't fallen apart? There were days she wanted to scream at the sunlight for daring to shine when she was dead. But eventually, about 3 months after the funeral, Choma found herself stepping through the school gates once more. Dressed in a plain dark blue dress, she still wore a black ribbon of mourning pinned discreetly to her chest. Her steps were slow and hesitant, but Nneka walked beside her, squeezing her hand in silent encouragement. The moment Choma entered her classroom, a chorus of tiny voices rang out. "Auntie Choma!" A dozen little children erupted in excitement, some of them clapping, others rushing to hug her legs. The sheer innocence and warmth of their welcome cracked the ice, encasing her heart. Choma managed a smile, small and trembling, but genuine, and blinked back the sudden tears that sprang to her eyes. She knelt down to embrace the children, letting their chatter wash over her, and realized that if not for her own sake, she had to try to be strong for them. These kids still needed her, still loved her, and in their bright eyes, she found a glimmer of purpose. Slowly, Painfully, life regained a semblance of routine. Chama poured herself into her teaching. Each day was hard, but she discovered that focusing on math problems and storybooks during school hours gave her mind something to hold on to other than grief. She even found herself laughing softly now and then at a child's silly jokes or a drawing proudly thrust into her hands. To the casual observer, she seemed to be healing. But inside, Chama felt hollow and fragile, as if one wrong touch could shatter her all over again. There were still moments when the pain ambushed her without warning, when she opened a drawer and found one of Seun's handwritten notes saying, "I love you," hidden among her things, or when she heard a high life song on the radio that he used to sing along to in the car. Sometimes, while walking home, she would catch a glimpse of a tall man in a crowd who looked like Seun from behind, and her heart would leap foolishly for one beat before reality set in. On particularly hard days, she would slip into an empty classroom during lunch break and let the tears come, biting down on her knuckles to muffle her sobs. She didn't want to upset the children or attract pity from colleagues. So she grieved in stolen private moments whenever the ache became too much to bear. Still, she persevered. With time, the raw wound in her heart began to form a scar. By the 6-month mark after Seun's death, Chama could say his name without immediately breaking down. She could even bring herself to visit his grave, an empty grave with a headstone next to his late father's, where she laid fresh flowers and spoke to the air, telling him how much she missed him. Through all of this, one question continued to nag quietly at the back of Chama's mind. Though she tried to push it away. Why? Why had Seun been on that particular highway at that exact terrible moment? He was such a careful driver, the type to avoid reckless truckers and bad roads. It felt like such a cruel twist of fate. On nights when sleep eluded her, she would stare at the ceiling and torment herself with unanswerable doubts. Had he suffered in those final seconds? Did he see the crash coming? Did he have any last thought of her? The uncertainty gnawed at her, but she knew she might never truly know the answers. With a heavy heart, she tried to accept that some questions would remain forever unanswered. Little did Chama know that the answers and the astonishing truths behind the tragic day were yet to come. While Chama grieved, Seun Adeyemi was very much alive. On the day of the supposed accident, after leaving his home and the woman who loved him, Seun drove not towards Benin City, but to a desolate stretch of the road off the main highway. His heart pounded and his palms were sleek on the steering wheel as he went over the plan in his mind. Every detail had to be right. He had chosen a spot where the road curved sharply and the dense bushes lined the sides, a place where accidents were sadly not uncommon. With a deep breath and trembling fingers, he took off his gold wedding ring and the anniversary wristwatch Chama had gifted him. For a moment, he stared at those precious items in his palm. A wave of guilt and doubt crashed over him. What was he doing? In that instant, an image of Chama's smiling face flashed in his mind. Her trusting eyes as she waved goodbye to him that very morning. His resolve nearly broke. He clutched the ring so hard it bit into his skin. It's too late to turn back. He muttered to himself, voice shaking. If he didn't go through with this, the people he owed money would destroy him and perhaps hurt Chama too. At least this way, he told himself, she would be safe from his mess. She could mourn, yes, but then maybe she could move on and have a better life without the burden he had become. Under the grey afternoon sky, Seun placed the ring and the watch on the driver's seat, along with his briefcase and a few personal papers that would identify him. His throat tightened as he arranged them to be clearly found. Each item felt like a farewell. He whispered, "I'm sorry," as if somehow Chama's spirit could hear him, then stepped away. He had already doused parts of the car's interior with extra foil. With a shaking hand, he lit a rag and dropped it onto the soaked upholstery from the open driver's door. Whoosh! Within seconds, flames leaked up, orange and violent. Heat seared his face as he stumbled back. The fire caught quickly, engulfing the front seat. Black smoke billowed into the sky. Shehu turned and ran through the bushes toward a dirt lane where a second-hand motorcycle he had purchased waited, hidden earlier that day. As he gunned the motorcycle bike to life and sped away, cross-country, tears streamed down his face, whether it was from the acrid smoke stinging his eyes or the weight of what he had just done. Even he couldn't tell. He did not look back at the column of smoke rising behind him like a signal of his own death. In the following weeks, Shehu vanished from Lagos. He left behind everything: his home, his business, his friends, and the wife he had vowed to love forever. News of the accident was likely dominating conversations back in his old neighborhood, but he forced himself not to dwell on it. He couldn't bear to imagine Chama's face or the agony she must be going through. Whenever the thought of her crept in, he numbed them by focusing on the road ahead. Shehu traveled north under the cover of anonymity. With some cash he had secretly stashed, he moved from town to town for a while, staying in cheap hotels, using a fake name, and keeping a low profile. Every night, alone in a strange bed, he was haunted by nightmares of Chama's cries. More than once, he awoke sweating and heart pounding, with her name on his lips. But come morning, he would steel himself again. There was no undoing what he had set in motion. After a few months, Shehu settled into the capital city, Abuja, far from the meddling eyes of anyone who might recognize him. He grew out a beard and started going by Kunle, a middle name he never used before. Whenever he had to introduce himself, using what little funds he had left, he partnered with a small transport company under his new identity, applying the skills he had from running his Lagos business. The work was hard, but it kept him busy, and more importantly, it kept him under the radar. It was in Abuja that he met Amara. Their paths crossed at a pharmacy, of all places, where Shehu, now Kunle, was picking up headache medicine. Amara was the pharmacist who handed him the pills with a polite smile. She was a soft-spoken, compassionate woman with bright, inquisitive eyes. In the weeks that followed, he found excuses to visit the pharmacy regularly, drawn to the kindness in her face and the gentle way she asked, "How are you doing today?" He learned that Amara had moved to the city not long ago for her job. She was originally from Owerri in Igbo land, and like Chama, she had a certain warmth and generosity about her. But unlike with Chama, Shehu felt no history, no guilt with Amara. He had a blank slate. He told her a bit of his fabricated story, that he was an only child, that his parents were deceased, and that he had spent some years abroad, which explained why he had few friends around and sometimes stumbled over details of local happenings. He did not mention ever being married. In this new life, he was a bachelor looking for stability, or so he portrayed. Loneliness and the desire for a fresh start drew Shehu and Amara closer. Within 6 months, they were dating seriously. Each time Amara laughed at his jokes or rested her head on his shoulder during a movie, Cheung felt a confusing mix of comfort and pangs of conscience. He tried to push thoughts of Chama away, telling himself that that chapter was closed and that Chama would have certainly been able to move on by now too. But in the quiet moments, when Amara fell asleep on his chest, he would stare at the ceiling and feel the hollowness of the lies he was living. Still, he continued on that path. About a year after his disappearance from Lagos, under his assumed identity, Cheung married Amara in a small court ceremony. There was no elaborate celebration. He claimed to Amara that he preferred something quiet and that he had only a few distant relatives who couldn't attend. Amara's own family, delighted that their daughter had found a loving husband, traveled in from Owerri. Cheung felt a stab of shame as her aging parents thanked him with tears in their eyes for making their daughter happy. He forced a smile and accepted their hugs, all the while hearing an inner voice sneering at him. If they knew the truth, they would call you a monster. Despite the deceit at its foundation, Cheung's new life with Amara was almost peaceful for a time. They rented a modest bungalow on the outskirts of Abuja. He woke up each morning to the aroma of Amara's coffee and her bright good morning love. She was an attentive wife, massaging his shoulders when he came home tired and celebrating his small business successes. In turn, he tried to be the doting husband she deserved, at least outwardly. Sometimes, in those early days of marriage, he almost convinced himself that he could truly leave the past behind, that perhaps he deserved this second chance at happiness. But the past has a way of catching up. One morning, Cheung sat in the living room while Amara prepared breakfast in the kitchen. He flipped on the television to catch the news. As he sipped his coffee, a talk show was coming on, one of those national morning programs. The cheerful host, Fumi Adewale, announced, "Today we have a special guest with us, a brave young widow who has turned her personal tragedy into a source of inspiration for others. Please welcome Mrs. Chama Nwosu." Cheung's cup slipped from his fingers and shattered on the tiled floor, coffee splattering his slippers. He felt the blood drain from his face. There on the TV screen was Chama, his Chama, live on national television. She looked thinner and a bit pale, but still achingly familiar. She wore a simple navy dress and a calm, composed expression. The host gently prompted her with questions. At the bottom of the screen, a caption read, "Widow turns grief into hope. Chama Nwosu on life after loss." Cheung's heart slammed against his chest. He was frozen, crouched half out of his seat, ignoring the hot coffee seeping into his slippers. In the kitchen, Amara heard the cup shatter and poked her head out. "Kunle, are you okay? What happened?" she asked, concerned. His mind raced. He fumbled for the remote and quickly turned off the television. The image of Chama blinking out to a black screen. I'm fine," he stammered, forcing a smile that he hoped looked apologetic rather than terrified. I just dropped my mug. Clumsy me." Amara stepped over and glanced at the mess on the floor. "Oh no, are you hot?" she exclaimed, grabbing a dish towel to dab at the spilled coffee and pick up the larger ceramic shards. "I'm alright," Cheung lied, bending down to help, but with hands that still trembled. His heart was thudding so loudly he feared she might hear it. He kept his eyes averted, praying she hadn't seen or heard anything from the TV. It didn't seem she had. The volume had been low. As Amara disposed of the broken pieces and went to fetch the mop, She studied him with a gentle frown. You look like you've seen a ghost. Was it just the spill or did something else happen? You're white as a sheet. Cheung swallowed hard. I just remembered something unpleasant from work. That's all. I'm sorry I made a mess. She reached out and rubbed his arm reassuringly. It's okay. Accidents happen, she said softly. Why don't you go wash up? Breakfast is almost ready. He nodded and muted the thanks, escaping to the bathroom. The moment the door closed behind him, Cheung gripped the sink basin and hung his head, his entire body shaking. He stared at his reflection in the mirror, the face of a man who should have been dead, now flushed with panic, seeing Chama alive and well. Not just alive, but speaking publicly rattled him to the core. His mind replayed the snippet he saw. Chama sitting poised, hand clasped tightly in her lap. The host had said she turned her tragedy into inspiration. What did that mean? What was she doing? His stomach churned with guilt as he imagined what she might have said. Was she talking about him? He could only imagine the lies she had been told, the narrative of his tragic death that she had believed for over a year. In that brief glimpse, she had seemed composed, even strong. A far cry from the broken woman he left sobbing on the floor of their living room in his nightmares. Somehow, she had picked up the pieces of her life he shattered. There was a punch in his chest, part sorrow, part something like pride in her resilience, but it was quickly overtaken by cold dread. What if she somehow discovered the truth? No, he reassured himself. She couldn't possibly. He had been so careful. There was no trail leading to Abuja. No one who knew both of his identities. He had even changed his phone number and avoided social media entirely. Chama was simply moving on with her life, just as he wanted for her. He should feel relieved to see her doing well. Yet, all he felt was an overwhelming mix of shame and fear. In the kitchen, he heard Amara humming a tune as she set the table. He took several deep breaths and splashed water on his face. He had to pull himself together. There was no way to explain any of this to anyone. He needed to act normal. Jill returned to the dining area, forcing down the turmoil inside. Over breakfast, he barely touched his food. He nodded absently as Amara chatted about an upcoming visit from her cousin. His mind was elsewhere, still in shock. He kept hearing Choma's voice in his head, recalling the soft way she used to call him my love in the mornings. Now she was calling him late husband in public, perhaps telling the world what a wonderful man he had been. The bitter irony made him want to crawl out of his skin. That day at work, Cheung couldn't focus. He found himself snapping at a colleague and then apologizing, blaming a headache. By evening, he was jumpy and irritable, causing Amara to ask if he was feeling ill. He claimed he was just tired. Late that night, when Amara was asleep, Cheung crept out of bed into the living room. In the darkness, he turned the TV back on with the volume muted, hoping perhaps the channel might rerun segments or that the news sticker might mention Chama's appearance. There was nothing. He stared at the blank blue glow of the screen after broadcast had ended, his mind racing. It dawned on him that Chama's public appearance could attract attention. What if someone from Abuja who knew him in this new life somehow saw it and put two and two together? The chance was slim, but it gnawed at him. He resolved to keep an even lower profile for a while. No unnecessary socialization. Avoid crowded public places. He couldn't risk anyone seeing a resemblance if they had also watched that program. As he finally went back to bed, sleeping under the covers beside Amara, Cheun tried to calm his pounding heart. It was just a TV show, he told himself. Chama was moving on, just like he wanted. She would never know he was out there, watching. Their worlds would remain separate. They had to. For Chama, life had begun to acquire a fragile normalcy in the months following her television appearance. She had shared her story on the morning show, hoping to help others experiencing loss. The experience was cathartic. Speaking about her pain and her journey towards healing made her feel less alone. And perhaps it honored Sheun's memory in a way. She returned home after the interview feeling strangely lighter, unaware that her words had set unforeseen events into motion. A week later, on a Sunday afternoon, Chama heard a hesitant knock on her apartment door. When she opened it, she was astonished to find Tunde standing there. His face was pale and drawn, a stark contrast to his usual jovial demeanor. Chama's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't seen much of Tunde since the funeral. His appearance now, unannounced, made her instinctively brave herself for bad news. "Tunde, is everything alright?" she asked, voice tight with concern. She motioned for him to come in. Tunde stepped inside, wiping sweat from his brow. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out at first. He simply stared at Chama, anguish and uncertainty in his eyes. "Is everything alright?" she asked, voice tight with concern. She motioned for him to come in. Tunde stepped inside, wiping sweat from his brow. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out at first. He simply stared at Chama, anguish and uncertainty in his eyes. The silence made Chama's stomach clench. She guided him to sit on the sofa and sat beside him, dreading whatever he was struggling to say. "Please, you are scaring me," she whispered. "What is it?" Tunde swallowed hard. Chama, I need you to prepare yourself." He began softly. What I'm about to say will sound impossible. I can barely believe it myself." Chama's pulse quickened. She could see his hands trembling on his knees. She reached over and held them steady, her own fingers iced cold. "Just tell me." "I was in Abuja yesterday for work," Tunde said, taking a shuddering breath. "I was coming out of a restaurant in Wuse district and I saw someone. Chioma, I saw Sheun." The name hit her like a physical blow. Chama jerked back, dropping his hand. What do you mean?" "That's not funny, Tunde," she said sharply, her voice rising in panic. "I know," he said quickly, his eyes bleeding. "I know how it sounds, but I swear on my life, I saw him. He looked a bit different, older. A bird, but it was him, alive." Choma felt the room tilt. She gripped the edge of the sofa, suddenly unsteady. A faint buzzing filled her ears. No, it can't be. Her rational mind rebelled against the notion. Sheun was dead. He had died over a year ago. She buried him. This had to be some cruel mistake. Perhaps someone who resembled him. There are many Yoruba men who might share features. Tunde pressed on gently. "I thought I was crazy too. I only caught a glimpse at first. I almost let it go, but then I heard him laugh, just a few yards from me. I know Sheun's laugh. I know it anyway." Chioma's breath caught. Memories of her husband's laughter, warm and distinct, flooded her mind. How many times had that laughter echoed in their home? If Tunde was telling the truth, and he truly heard it, No, he whispered, shaking her head as tears sprung to her eyes. No, you must have mistaken. Maybe someone who looks like him. Or you were tired and imagined it. Tunde reached into his pocket with an unsteady hand and pulled out his phone. I wasn't sure either, so I followed him for a bit. At a distance, they went into a supermarket. I managed to take a photo when they came out. He unlocked the phone and opened a picture, handing it to her. With dread coiling in her stomach, Chama peered at the screen. The photo was a bit blurry and zoomed in, but she could make out a man's figure walking beside a woman near a parking lot. The man was wearing a casual shirt and jeans, a baseball cap on his head. He had a beard, but even through the facial hair and the grainy quality of the image, Chama's heart recognized the shape of his face, his posture, the way his arm hung at his side. It was as if her soul knew at once. Even as her mind screamed in denial, the woman at the man's side was slender, dressed in a floral print dress. Her hand casually linked around his arm as they headed to a car. Chama's vision blurred with tears. Her hand flew to her mouth as a sob of shock and anger burst out. It's him! Oh God! She couldn't finish the sentence. The phone slipped from her fingers onto the couch. Immediately, Nneka, who had been in the kitchen and overheard raised voices, rushed into the living room. She took one look at Chioma's stricken face and then at Tunde and demanded, "What's going on?" Chioma couldn't speak. She was shaking all over, her breath coming shallow and fast. Tunde rose and gestured for Nneka to follow him a few steps away, quickly explaining in a hushed, urgent tone. He believed Shehu was alive, hiding in Abuja with another woman. As Nneka listened, her eyes widened in disbelief and fury. "That devil," Nneka hissed, glancing back at Chioma, who was now hunched over, face in her hands, sobbing. How could he? How dare he? Nneka's own face contorted between compassion for her friend and pure outrage at Shehun's betrayal. She kneeled beside Chioma and wrapped her arm around her. "Chioma, I'm sorry," she whispered, voice thick. "I know this is a lot, but listen, if this is true, if it's true, then we need to be very careful about what to do next." Chioma lifted her face, tears streaming. In those tears, there was not only pain, but the first flicker of incandescent anger. "If it's true," she repeated in a hollow voice, "that picture, it's him, Nneka. How can it be? How? I watched them bury a coffin. I wore mourning for him. I prayed for him every night, and he's been alive all this time." Her voice cracked, rising to a wail. "With another woman, living as if we never existed?" Nneka pulled her into a fierce hug as a fresh sobs racked Chioma's body. Tunde looked on, heartbroken and guilt-ridden. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I didn't want to believe it either. I know this is unimaginable, but we have to act. He can't get away with this." Through her sobs, a harder edge entered Chioma's voice. "I need to see him," she said suddenly, pulling back from Nneka's embrace. Her eyes were red but steely. I need to look him in the eyes. I need to look him in the face and hear him admit what he's done." "We will," Nneka assured, gently brushing hair from Chioma's damp cheek. "But not alone. We have to do this right." Over the next day, after the initial shock settled from a boil to a determined simmer, Chioma gathered her resolve. Nneka, ever practical, suggested they reach out to the journalist from the TV. Funmi Adewale, she might have resources, or at least she'll be interested in helping uncover such a story. Nneka reasoned. And you trust her, right? You opened up to her once. Chama nodded numbly. In truth, she remembered Fumi's kind, earnest eyes during the interview and how genuinely the journalist seemed to care. If anyone would treat this discovery with sensitivity and discretion, it was likely her. And so, with trembling hands, Chama called Fumi. As soon as she explained the situation, Fumi's voice on the other end turned grave and serious. Within hours, Fumi met with Chama, Nneka and Tunde at Chama's apartment. Spread on the coffee table were printed stills from the photo Tunde had taken, alongside an enlarged photo of Shehu from 2 years ago, one of Chama's favorites of him smiling on a beach vacation. Fumi leaned forward, comparing them. The resemblance is undeniable, she said quietly. It looks like the same man, just with facial hair and a little older. But why would he do this? Fumi asked aloud, struggling to fathom it. Fake his death. Let his own wife suffer. It's monstrous. Debt, Tunde answered with a bitter shake of his head. He had finally pieced it together himself. His business was failing. I knew he was in some financial trouble, but I never imagined he must have thought disappearing was the only way out. And the woman with him, Nneka added, he's obviously started a new life. It looked like they are a couple. She spat the last word, anger flaring again. Chama was silent for a long time, staring at the images on the table. Her finger traced over the figure of the woman clinging to Shehun's arm. Amara, she murmured, testing the name. Tunde had overheard the woman call out. The syllables felt foreign and painful on her tongue. He has a new wife. Fumi placed a hand gently on Chama's. We will help you, Chama. We need to confirm everything in person. But if this is true, people deserve to know the truth, and you deserve justice. A plan took shape in the days that followed. Chama was adamant that she wanted to confront Chehun face to face. The thought of seeing him again made her both sick with anticipation and electrified with righteous fury. There would be no hiding for him this time. Fumi arranged for a cameraman and a sound technician from her network, under the pretense of shooting a follow-up human interest piece in Abuja. She also discreetly contacted local Abuja authorities and a lawyer willing to accompany them. If Shehu Adeyemi was alive, there would likely be legal repercussions, and they wanted to be prepared to press charges for fraud and bigamy. Tunde provided a likely address. He had quietly trailed Shehu and Amara's car after taking the photo, hanging back at a safe distance until he saw them pull up at the driveway of a bungalow in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It was risky, but he had been careful not to be noticed. And so one early morning, Chama found herself on a flight to Abuja with Nneka by her side gripping her hand, and Fumi and her small crew seated just across the aisle. Chama's heart thudded the entire journey. What would she say when she saw him? What would he say? A part of her, a deeply wounded part, wanted to scream and collapse at his feet. To ask him how he could do such a thing to her, to their vows, to their families. Another part of her wanted to slap him, to rain down every curse she could think of. Still, another part simply wanted to hear him admit it, to have the truth laid bare, so she could finally let go of the ghost of the man she thought she knew. They rented 2 cars upon arrival in Abuja. The plan was simple, yet fraught with emotion. They would approach the house mid-morning, when likely both Shehu or Kule and Amara would be home preparing for their day. One camera crew would stay slightly back to film from a respectful distance. not intruding until necessary. Funmi, along with Chama, Nneka, Tunde, and lawyer, and 2 local police officers in plain clothes, would go to the door. As the cars rolled quietly onto the tranquil street, Chama spotted the house Tunde had described, a model single-story bungalow with cream-colored walls and a small hibiscus garden out in front. It looked so ordinary, it was hard to imagine that inside those walls lived the man who had upended her entire world. They parked a little down the street. Chama's hands were shaking violently now. Nneka squeezed her shoulder. "You can do this," she whispered. "We are all right here, okay?" Chama nodded, swallowing hard. Her mouth was bone dry. She stepped out of the car on legs that felt like water. In her purse, she carried Seun's couched wedding ring. She had worn it on a chain around her neck ever since the accident, a token of her love and loss. Now it felt like it was burning a hole through her purse. She wasn't sure why she brought it, maybe to thrust it at him as proof of what he had done, or maybe because a part of her still clung to that piece of him in lieu of his presence. They walked towards the house as a group. The morning sun was already blazing, and sweat beaded on Chioma's forehead, though she barely noticed. Each step felt so real, but by the time they reached the front gate, Chioma's heart was hammering so loudly she thought she might faint. Funmi gently touched her arm and mouthed, "Ready?" Chioma drew in a shaky breath and nodded, wiping her damp palms on her skirt. Tunde, jaw set with anger, rang the doorbell. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door opened. Seun stood there, dressed in a casual polo shirt and jeans, looking every bit alive as the day he left her. Up close, Chioma could see the subtle changes, a fuller beard along his jaw, a bit more weight around his middle, a few new worry lines around his eyes, but it was him, the same broad shoulders, the same face she had cupped in her hands 100 times, the same eyes that now went wide with instant recognition and terror. He froze in the doorway, his complexion instantly draining to ashen grey. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. It was as though his brain couldn't compete with what he was saying. His wife, the woman he had widowed, standing before him like an apparition, flanked by strangers with a camera and 2 policemen. Chioma's entire body trembled, seeing him in the flesh. Mere inches away, she felt a surge of emotions so powerful she could barely contain them. Sorrow, longing, hatred, disbelief, all welled within her. Her eyes brimmed with tears, but she steadied herself, nails digging into her palms. "Oluwaseun," she said, her voice surprisingly clear in the hot still air. She hadn't spoken his full name in so long. It felt foreign and familiar at once. "Surprised to see me?" At the sound of his name on her lips, Seun flinched as if struck. Chioma," he stammered. No excuse came to him. No easy lie sprang forth. How could there be any lie big enough to cover the enormity of what he had done? Behind him, a voice called, "Kunle, who is it?" Amara stepped into the view from the hallway, wearing a house dress and a confused smile that faltered the instant she saw the crowd at the door. Her eyes landed on Chioma, taking in the resemblance of features between this stranger and the man she thought she knew. "Kunle, what's going on?" she asked uncertainly. Chioma's gaze shifted to Amara. She was young, perhaps a few years younger than Chioma, and attractive, with kind eyes that now darted in growing alarm between Shehu and Chama. In that moment, Chama realized the second woman was a much victim of Shehu's lies as she was. Shehu tried to step out, as if to shut the door behind him and block Amara's view, but Tunde and one of the officers moved quickly to prevent that. Standing in the doorway, Shehu raised his hand reflexively. What is this? He finally managed, his voice trembling. He attempted a weak smile that collapsed under Chama's withering stare. The sound of her name, spoken so familiarly by the man who had abandoned her like a fuse in Chama's chest. Months, no, over a year of pent-up grief and rage poured out. "Explain?" she repeated, her voice rising. A tear rolled down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. She stepped forward, and Shehu instinctively stepped back into the house, allowing her and the others to push through the threshold into the living room. The camera crew followed at a distance, the lens trained steadily on the unfolding confrontation. "Please everyone, can we sit and talk?" Shehu pleaded, eyes darting around at the faces. Tunde glaring at him with disgust, Nneka practically shaking with fury, Fumi with her jaw set professionally, the camera capturing his every move, the policeman watching sternly, and the lawyer who had opened a notebook the minute they entered. His gaze finally fell on Amara, who hovered near the wall, bewildered and frightened. "Amara, I don't know what they've told you." Chama cut him off sharply. "They haven't told her anything. Why don't you tell her, Shehu? Or is it Kunle now?" She spat the false name like poison. The sound of it made Amara flinch. Chama saw the other woman's eyes widen as realization began to dawn. "Shehu," Amara echoed in a small voice, looking at her husband. If she could even call him that now, in confusion. What is she saying? "Kunle, who are these people?" Shehu raised a hand toward her. "Amara, please, I promise I can explain everything." "Then start explaining," Fumi interjected firmly, stepping forward. She held up her press ID with one hand while the other gestured towards the camera behind her. "Mr. Adeyemi, I'm Fumi Adewale from Morning Sunrise on NTA. We are here as witnesses. Chama also has something to say to you." Shehu's face crumpled at the name. His real name, spoken aloud for the first time in Amara's presence. Amara gasped softly and brought a hand to her mouth. Chama's chest was heaving. She never imagined she would have to confront him like this. But now the words came tumbling out, followed by a year of agony. "How could you?" she cried, voice breaking. "How could you do this to me? To all of us. I mourned you. Your mother mourned you. We thought you were dead, Shehu. I wished I had died myself from the pain of losing you." Her voice echoed off the walls of the cozy living room. "Do you have any idea what you put me through?" Shehu was crying now, tears streaming down his face, but Chama could not find an ounce of sympathy in her heart at that moment. He reached out as if to touch her shoulder, an almost reflexive gesture to comfort, but she recoiled. Nneka stepped protectively closer to Chama. "I'm sorry," Shehu choked, palms pressed together in a plea. "Chama, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I thought it was only way. I was in so much trouble." "Trouble?" Chama let out a hollow laugh that bordered on a sob. "So you decided to make me a widow, to fake your death and disappear. That was your solution, leaving me to believe you burned alive, to cry over an empty coffin." At this, Amara let out a strangled cry herself. Fake your death, Kunle? What is she talking about? She stepped toward him, her expression a mix of shock and desperate hope that this was all some prank or misunderstanding. Shehu turned to Amara, his face contorted with remorse. Amara, my name isn't Kunle, he confessed quietly. It's Oluwaseun Adeyemi. I faked my death back in Lagos. I'm married to her. He nodded towards Chama, each word coming out, halting and drenched in shame. Amara staggered as if struck. One of the officers moved to steady her, but she caught herself on the arm of a chair. No, that's not possible, she whispered, tears welling. Her gaze swung to Chama. You are his wife? But he told me he has never married. Oh God. She pressed a hand to her chest as her breathing quickened. Chama's anger softened slightly as she regarded the devastated young woman. She understood too well the feeling of one's world collapsing in an instant. I'm sorry, Chama said softly to Amara, her voice heavy with empathy even through her own pain. I didn't know about you until recently. I'm as betrayed as you are. Amara's eyes overflowed with tears. She looked at Shehu, or whosoever he was, with a mixture of heartbreak and disgust. How could you do this? She demanded in a trembling voice. You made me believe in you, love you, and you had a wife grieving you this whole time. She wiped furiously at her tears. Was anything you told me true? Shehu took a step toward her, but she held up a hand to stop him, anger sparking through her heart. Don't you? The lawyer cleared his throat, stepping forward. Mr. Adeyemi, he said formally, my name is Barrister Ifeanyi Okoro. I represent Mrs. Chioma Nwosu. You should be aware that beyond the personal devastation you've caused, your actions carry legal consequences. You are potentially liable for criminal offenses, including fraud and bigamy, not to mention any wrongful claims associated with your supposed death. Shehu seemed barely to register the lawyer's words. He had sunk onto the couch, face in his hands, sobbing openly now. A pathetic figure of a man, undone by his own lies. I'll go to jail, he wept. I'll pay whatever. Just, please. It wasn't clear if he was begging the legal authorities or the women he had wronged, or both. One of the plainclothes officers stepped forward and placed a firm hand on Shehu's shoulder. Mr. Adeyemi, I think it's time you come with us, he said, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. You will have the chance to make a statement down at the station. As the officer pulled his arms back to cuff him, Shehu lifted his tear-streaked face towards Choma. Chioma, please, I am so sorry, he rasped. I never meant for this to turn out like this. I was cowardly and stupid. I thought I was sparing you. Spare me? Choma's voice rose again. You think it spared me to watch my life collapse? To cry for you every night? To blame myself for not saving you from that imaginary accident? You didn't spare me anything, Shehu. You just spared yourself. Those words landed with a heavy finality. Shehu sagged, defeated, as the handcuffs clicked around his waist. Amara stood off to the side, hugging herself, tears silently falling as the life she knew crumbled. With Shehu secured, the officers guided him to his feet. Fumi gave a slight nod to her cameraman, who stepped back to allow the police to do their work without interference. Though he kept filming, Tunde watched grimly, arms crossed, while Nneka moved to Chioma's side, gently slipping an arm around her waist in support. As they led Seun towards the door, Chama spoke once more, her voice quieter now, filled with a sorrowful dignity. "You asked me once to trust you no matter what," she said, recalling a distant memory of happier times. "I did, and you repaid that trust with betrayal of the worst kind." She paused, looking over his shoulders one last time. The weight of her words crushed him. "I'm sorry," he whispered again, but it was barely audible. Chama held his gaze, her eyes filled not with the love of a wife, but the resolve of a woman wronged and unbroken. "Sorry can't bring back the dead," she replied, voice steadier than she felt inside. "The man I loved died the day you chose to leave me, Seun, and he's never coming back." With that, she turned away, unable to look at him any longer. She heard him let out a broken sob as the officers escorted him out of the house and towards a waiting vehicle. The sound tugged at the old heartstrings, but she closed her eyes tight, letting the tears fall, and reminded herself that this man was a stranger now, a stranger who had won her husband's face. Inside the living room, silence hung in the air after Shehu's departure. The only sounds were the muffled cries of Amara, who had sunk into a chair, and Chioma's own raged breathing as she tried to steady herself. Fumi stepped forward to gently signal her crew to stop filming. She approached Tamara first, couching beside the distraught woman and speaking softly. "I know this is devastating, but you have a right to know that none of this was your fault." Amara nodded absently, eyes distant. "He lied to me every single day," she whispered, voice cracking. "I married a lie." Fresh tears flowed, and Fumi offered her a tissue and a comforting hand on her shoulder. Meanwhile, Nneka turned Choma toward her and enveloped her in a tight embrace. Choma finally let out a wail against her friend's shoulder, releasing a torrent of emotion she had held in check throughout the confrontation. Nneka stroked her back and murmured soothing words, her own tears dampening her cheeks. Tunde stood by, running a hand over his face, exhaling deeply as if he had been holding his breath for the last 15 minutes. He looked at Chioma and Nneka, and his expression softened from anger to concern. "Chioma, I'm sorry to have been the bearer of this," he said quietly. Chioma pulled away from Nneka's shoulder, wiping her face. There was a surprised calm in her now, a sense of closure amidst the heartbreak. She managed a smile nod towards Tunde. "Thank you," she said hoarsely, "for telling me, for not letting me live the rest of my life in a lie." Barrister Okoro approached Chioma gently. "Mrs. Nwosu, I will handle the formalities from here. The police will charge him. You will be likely need to give a statement about the past event, but if you prefer, that can wait a day or two. You've been through enough for one day." Chioma took a shaky breath. "I will. Whatever needs to be done, I'll do it. He has to face the consequences." The lawyer nodded respectfully. "And he will. We will make sure of that." As the sun climbed higher, painting the Abuja sky in a bright, indifferent blue, Chioma stepped outside that bungalow, feeling like she had walked out of a long, dark tunnel. The man she had loved so deeply was truly gone, not in the tragic way she once believed, but by his own cruel choice. It was a different kind of loss, a double-edged tragedy. The death of a man she thought she knew, and the revelation of the man he truly was. In the days that followed, news of the scandal spread, and many watched in astonishment as the story unfolded on television and in the papers. Men fakes own death, discovered living double life, became a nationwide headline. Public sympathy poured in for Chioma and even for Amara, while scathing condemnation was directed at Seun. Legal proceedings were swift. Chinua Adeyemi was charged with fraud for falsifying his death and any associated document, and with bigamy for marrying Amara with still legally married to Chama. In addition, creditors he had evaded came forward to lodge their own complaints. In court, he looked small and defeated as he pleaded guilty. The judge did not mince words, calling his actions cruel. He was sentenced to several years in prison. Throughout the trial, Chama attended only when necessary to provide testimony, each appearance a test of her strength. Amara too was there, often accompanied by her parents, who glared at their former son-in-law with heartbreak and anger. At one hearing, as they passed each other in the corridor, Chama and Amara shared a quiet moment. They looked at one another with understanding that needed no words. In a brief, tearful exchange, they held each other's hands. "I'm so sorry for what he did," Chama whispered. Amara shook her head, tears in her eyes. "He hurt us both," she replied. Then, unable to say more, they embraced silently before parting ways. In that embrace was the sad sisterhood of two women wronged by the same man, each finding a bit of solace in the other's understanding. When it was over and Shehu was led away in handcuffs for the second time, this time to serve his sentence, Choma felt an overwhelming wave of relief mingled with sorrow. Justice had been served, but there was no glee in for it, only a profound sense of closure and the bittersweet knowledge that life would have to continue on new terms. In Lagos, Choma returned to her teaching job and her modest apartment. The place felt different now, lighter, as if the ghost had finally been exorcised. One evening, weeks after the court case concluded, she gathered the courage to pack away the last of Shehu's belongings that she had kept. The shared wedding ring, symbol of a love that had died in more ways than one. She placed in a small box along with their photographs and his letters. She decided she would deliver it to Mama Adeyemi, his poor mother, who, though furious and deeply hurt by her son's actions, still wanted that piece of him. It was another heartbreaking conversation Chioma had during the trial, when the elderly woman tearfully apologized to Chioma over and over, as if she bore responsibility for her son's sins. After sealing the box, Chioma sat on her bed, exhausted but at peace. Nneka was brewing tea in the kitchen, humming softly through the window. The sounds of Lagos life drifted in, a distant car horn, children playing on the street, a street hawker calling out words. Life, indifferent and vibrant, went on. Chioma breathed in deeply. There was pain still. She knew there would be for some time. But there was also hope. Hope in her own resilience. Hope in the love of friends who had stood by her. Hope in the belief that honesty and truth would prevail in the end. She stood and glanced at herself in the mirror. The woman who gazed back looked older, steadier, scared, but not broken, betrayed, but not defeated. Chioma knew she would carry the scars of Shehu's betrayal for the rest of her days, but she also knew that those scars would remind her of her own strength and capacity to overcome. That night, for the first time since Shehu's death, Chioma slept without crying. Her dreams were peaceful and her heart, though still tender, felt ready to heal. In the morning, she woke to a new day dawning through her window. She whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude for truth, for justice, for the strength to move forward. And as the sun bathed Lagos in golden light, Chioma Nwosu rose to greet her life anew, determined to live it on her own terms, with her head high and her spirit unbroken. The most important lesson in this story is that betrayal from someone you deeply love can feel worse than death, but healing, strength, and truth will always rise from the ashes of lies. Chama gave her heart, her trust, her soul to Shehu. She built a future with him, sacrificed, supported, and stood by him. But the man she loved chose selfishness. He ran from his problems and used love as a shield for his deceit. He let her mourn him like a widow while he lived a life with another woman. And yet, in the face of that unimaginable pain, Chama rose. She did not seek revenge with bitterness. She sought the truth with courage. And when she found it, she stood tall in front of her betrayer, not to beg, not to fight, but to reclaim her voice and her dignity. This story teaches us that heartbreak doesn't kill you. It transforms you. It turns your pain into power. It reminds us that no matter how badly someone breaks you, you can rise, you can speak, and you can heal. And when you do, the truth, no matter how delayed, will always set you free. Because the man who buried her in silence was exposed in front of the whole world, and the woman he tried to erase found herself again, not in revenge, but in resilience. Don't mourn the people who chose to live you through lies. Mourn the version of yourself that didn't know your own strength, and then let that version go and become the woman who cannot be destroyed. And with that, my dear friends, our story comes to a close. But remember, the magic of storytelling lives on, waiting to whisk us away on new adventures where the wonders of imagination know no bound. Goodbye for now, and may your dreams be filled with joy, wonder, and endless possibility. Thank you so much for watching. Please kindly comment, like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more interesting stories.